You ever get that feeling that there's some kind of invisible script running in the background of, well, everything? Like our societies, our biology, even our own minds are all being guided by some hidden operating system. We're going to dive deep into that idea. Because it turns out, thinkers from totally different fields, from social engineering all the way to psychedelic exploration, they seem to have all stumbled upon pieces of this same invisible architecture. So our jumping off point is this quote from Norbert Wiener, who's basically the father of cybernetics. He said, "Society can only be understood through a study of the messages and the communication facilities which belong to it." What he's really saying here is, if you want to understand any complex system, don't just look at the physical parts. Look at the information flowing through it. The messages. That's the real blueprint.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the engineering of reality, then look at nature's hidden programs. After that, we'll get into the ghost in the machine, map out a new map of consciousness, and finally, pull it all together in the grand synthesis. It's going to be a wild ride.
Okay, part one, the engineering of reality. Let's kick things off by looking at how human systems, a lot like machines, can actually be intentionally steered and controlled. And what's wild is that the playbooks for this were written around the same time, but from two completely different worlds. So on one hand, you've got Edward Bernays, the guy who basically invented modern public relations. And on the other, Norbert Wiener, the genius behind cybernetics. I mean, these guys seem like they're from different planets, right? But what's so fascinating is that back in the mid-20th century, they were both totally obsessed with the exact same problem. How do you steer a really complex system, whether it's a society full of people or a complicated machine, towards a goal you've chosen? Bernays' whole game was something he wasn't afraid to call propaganda. He had this idea that if you could just tap into people's hidden unconscious desires, you could pretty much direct what he called the human herd. And get this for a classic example, bacon and eggs. You think that's the all-American breakfast because of tradition? Nope. Bernays made that happen. He convinced a whole nation to eat bacon for breakfast, not for health, but to help a pork company sell more product. He literally engineered our breakfast habits.
Now, Wiener's approach was totally different, at least on the surface. It was called cybernetics. And his big aha moment was the feedback loop. It's super simple when you think about it. A system does something, it measures the result, compares that result to its goal, and then uses that new info to adjust its next move. Your thermostat does this all day long, right? It's too cold, turn on heat. It's warm enough, turn off. Wiener's genius was realizing that this simple loop, this self-regulation, applies to everything, from missile guidance systems to you and me. Okay, so we've seen how humans can design these control systems. But let's be real. Nature has been running its own, far more complex programs for billions of years. This brings us to part two, nature's hidden programs. And as we're about to see, the logic that's really driving the show, it's not at all what you might think.
You know, for the longest time, we had this really nice, almost romantic story about nature. Biologists called it group selection. The idea was that animals do things for the good of the species, you know? The heroic old wildebeest sacrificing itself to save the herd. Well, as the brilliant biologist Robert Sapolsky says, that whole idea, total gibberish. The real operating system in nature is way more logical and, frankly, way more selfish. So the modern view is called individual selection, and it flips everything on its head. The goal isn't to save the species. The goal is to make as many copies of your own genes as possible. The animal, the organism, it's just a vehicle for the genes. There's this fantastic quote from the 19th century by Samuel Butler that just nails it. A chicken is just an egg's way of making another egg. See? The information, the genes, that's what's running the show.
Okay, but wait. If every organism is just out for itself, then why do we see so much cooperation in nature? That's the big question, right? Well, game theory actually gives us a beautiful answer in this simple little algorithm called tit for tat. It's basically a three-step program. Step 1, start by being nice, cooperate. Step 2, after that, just copy whatever the other guy did on the last move. Step 3, if they screw you over but then start cooperating again, forgive them. This simple, elegant strategy turns out to be amazing at building trust, especially when you know you're going to be seeing that other person again and again. It's all about the shadow of the future.
All right, so we found these hidden programs in society, and we found them in our genes. But what if we're looking in the wrong place? What if the frame is just too small? This is where things start to get really weird. Part 3, the ghost in the machine.
What if the information, the memory that guides a system, isn't even stored inside the thing itself?
And that brings us to this guy, the biologist Rupert Sheldrake. Now, he came up with a theory that is, let's just say, still wildly controversial, but you can't deny it's fascinating. He basically asked a question that seems simple but is actually profound. Where do the blueprints for life actually come from?
His answer is a theory he calls morphic resonance. The core idea is that nature forms habits, kind of like we do. He suggests that every self-organizing system, and that means everything from a tiny crystal to a massive galaxy, tunes into a kind of collective memory from all the similar systems that came before it. So for example, if a group of rats in a lab in London learns a new maze, Sheldrake's theory says it should become just a little bit easier for rats all over the world to learn that same maze. The memory isn't just in the brain, it's out there, in some kind of invisible organizing field. All right, if you thought a collective memory for nature was out there, buckle up. Because now we're going somewhere even stranger. We're going from a memory hidden in nature to the direct perception of a living, intelligent, informational reality. This is part 4, a new map of consciousness. And this map wasn't drawn by biologists. It was drawn by explorers of the inner cosmos.
So let's talk about the ethnobotanist Terence McKenna. He spent a huge part of his life documenting experiences with psychedelic substances. And what he reported wasn't just, chaotic patterns and swirling colors. Not at all. He described consistent, repeatable encounters with intelligent entities, beings made of living language and light. He famously called them syntactical animals or linguistic elves. And he said they don't just talk to you, they show you things. They pull reality apart and gesture with it, saying, look at this. And this is maybe the most mind-bending part of what McKenna was talking about. He said that in these states, language completely transforms. It stops being something you hear, abstract sounds and symbols. Instead, it becomes something you see. A physical, visible, three-dimensional object that you can look at from all sides. Think about that for a second. This led him to a radical conclusion. Maybe information isn't just a way to describe reality. Maybe information is the stuff reality is made of.
Now, McKenna was smart enough to know that this idea wasn't totally out of left field. He looked back and found that the ancient Greek philosophers talked about something called the logos, which was like an informing, divine voice in your head, and he thought, that's it. What he was seeing, he said, was a more perfect logos, a higher dimensional version of it that you don't just hear, you behold. From his perspective, these weren't just random hallucinations. He was tuning into a different channel of reality itself.
Okay, let's take a breath. We have covered a lot of ground. We've talked about social control, selfish genes, a memory in nature, and a visible language from another dimension. I mean, these things sound completely unrelated, right? But here's the big question for our final section. Part 5, the grand synthesis. What if they're not separate at all? What if they are all just different faces of one single unified system? So there's a speculative model out there that tries to tie all of this together. It's called the PSU model, and it basically proposes that the universe isn't just empty space with stuff floating in it. Instead, it suggests that all of reality is a kind of quantum superfluid, one single interconnected medium that fills everything. And the most fundamental property of this cosmic ocean? You guessed it, information. And this is where all those different threads we've been following can start to weave together. You take the physicist John Wheeler's famous idea, it from bit. That gives you the foundation, an informational universe. Then Rupert Sheldrake's morphic fields. Well, those could just be the memories, the habits, encoded as standing waves or patterns in that medium. How does it all regulate itself? That's where cybernetics from guys like Stafford Beer and Wiener comes in. The whole thing acts like one giant self-regulating system. And the purpose? Terence McKenna's novelty theory suggests the whole system has a built-in drive, an arrow of time, pulling it toward ever greater complexity and coolness. So here's the real kicker, the big takeaway. The laws of physics or the rules of biology, they aren't like some cosmic rulebook written by an external lawmaker. They're not imposed from the outside. Instead, they are the inherent properties of the medium itself. It's like the rules of how water behaves aren't separate from the water. They are the water. The patterns of life, the dance of particles, it all emerges naturally from the deep grammar of this universal informational sea. And that brings us right back where we started, full circle, to Norbert Wiener. And this might be his most profound insight of all. He said, "We are not stuff that abides, but patterns that perpetuate themselves. A pattern is a message." Think about that. We see ourselves as solid things, right? As stuff. But from this point of view, we're not. We are information. We're patterns that keep themselves going. We are messages echoing through this cosmic medium, which leads to a really stunning and maybe even a little unsettling conclusion. All these forces that feel other, the social engineering that shapes what we want, the ancient evolutionary programs that shape our bodies, even that profoundly alien intelligence that McKenna described, they aren't really separate from us. They are all just different expressions of the very same system that we are a part of. The stranger at the door, the alien, it's just a reflection in the mirror. It's us.
So, we're left with this one last huge thought. If this is even remotely true, if our universe really is a self-organizing, self-communicating informational system, then all of this, everything around us, is basically a conversation. Reality itself is a message. And that leaves us with the ultimate question. What is it trying to say?